answer either, he admitted. I've been telling myself for years that it's just their way, that they don't mean anything by it. But watching Emma's face last night, seeing how she reacted to their comments about her gifts, he trailed off, running his hands through his hair in frustration. I've been a coward, he said finally. I've been so afraid of confronting my family, of rocking the boat, that I've let them treat you terribly. I've let them treat our daughter terribly. It was the first time in 10 years that David had acknowledged the reality of his family's behaviour without making excuses for it. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that he was finally seeing clearly. Sadness that it had taken so long. What do you want to do about it? I asked. I want to fix it, he said. I want to set boundaries with my family. I want to make it clear that if they can't treat you and Emma with respect, then we won't be participating in family events. And if they choose not to change. David was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of what I was asking. Then we'll create our own traditions, he said finally. Our own family celebrations where Emma learns that she's valued for who she is, not judged for who she isn't. Emma emerged from the bathroom, her teeth brushed and her face bright with excitement about the day ahead. What should we do today? She asked, bouncing between David and me. Can we go ice skating? Can we see the Christmas lights downtown? Can we have dinner in the restaurant downstairs? We can do all of those things, David said, smiling at our daughter's enthusiasm. This is our Christmas, and we can celebrate it however we want. As we got dressed and prepared for our day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope that David would follow through on his promises. Hope that Emma would grow up knowing her worth wasn't determined by other people's approval. Hope that we could build something better than what we'd had before. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. David told us about your concerns. Perhaps we can discuss this like adults when you're feeling more rational. I showed the message to David, watching his face as he read his mother's dismissive response to our family crisis. She still doesn't get it, he said, shaking his head. She thinks this is about you being emotional, rather than about their behaviour being unacceptable. Are you surprised? I asked. No, he admitted, but I'm disappointed. I guess I hoped that maybe they would take this as a wake-up call. Some people can't change, I said gently, but we can choose how we respond to them. David typed a response to his mother. Sarah's concerns are completely valid. Until you're ready to treat her and Emma with genuine respect, we won't be attending family events. This isn't negotiable. He showed me the message before sending it, and I felt a surge of pride and love for the man I had married. The man who was finally choosing his wife and daughter over his family's approval. We spent the day exploring the city, ice skating at the outdoor rink, looking at Christmas lights, and having dinner at a cosy restaurant where Emma could laugh loudly and spill her drink without anyone making her feel ashamed. It was the best Christmas I could remember, not because of what we did, but because of who we were when we did it. That evening, as we settled back into our hotel room, Emma curled up between David and me on one of the beds. I like our Christmas adventure, she said sleepily. Can we do this again next year? We can do whatever makes us happy, I said, stroking her hair. That's what Christmas is really about. Being with people who love you exactly as you are. Good, Emma said, her eyes already closing. Because I like being exactly as I am. As Emma drifted off to sleep, David and I talked quietly about our future, about the boundaries we would set, the traditions we would create, the family we would build based on love and acceptance rather than hierarchy judgment. It wouldn't be easy. David's family would likely never understand or accept our decision to prioritise respect over tradition. There would be consequences, social, financial, emotional, to choosing our own path. But as I looked at my daughter sleeping peacefully between us, I knew we had made the right choice. Emma would grow up knowing that she deserved to be treated with kindness and respect. She would learn that love didn't come with conditions, that family meant acceptance, that she never had to make herself smaller to fit into someone else's idea of who she should be. The Christmas dinner that had started with subtle cruelty and casual dismissal had ended with the most important gift of all, the gift of self-respect, the gift of choice, the gift of showing my daughter that she deserved better than what we had been accepting. Sometimes the best Christmas present is the courage to leave the table where you're not valued and create your own feast where everyone is welcome exactly as they are. The end, sometimes, the most powerful lesson we can teach our children is that we don't have to accept unacceptable treatment, even from family. Sarah's story reminds us that love without respect isn't really love at all, and that the courage to walk away can be the first step towards building something better. About Emma asking why they treat you like that. And, I prompted, the Marriott's lobby was decorated with tasteful Christmas garland and twinkling lights, a stark contrast to the oppressive formality of the Hartwell estate. As Emma and I checked in, I felt a lightness in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years, the physical sensation of a weight being lifted, of finally breathing freely after holding my breath for a decade. "This is like an adventure, Mummy," Emma said as we rode the elevator to our room on the 15th floor. Her earlier sadness had been replaced by excitement, the resilience of childhood allowing her to bounce back from disappointment faster than I ever could. "It is an adventure," I agreed, squeezing her small hand. "Our very own Christmas adventure." The hotel room was nothing special. 2 queen beds, a small sitting area, and a view of the city lights, but it felt like a sanctuary. For the first time in hours, I wasn't walking on eggshells, wasn't monitoring every word for potential offence, wasn't watching my daughter's face for signs that she was absorbing another subtle lesson about her inadequacy. "Can we order room service?" Emma asked, bouncing on one of the beds with a kind of enthusiasm that would have earned a sharp rebuke from Patricia about proper behaviour. "Absolutely," I said, grabbing the menu from the nightstand. "What sounds good to you?" We spent the next hour in our pyjamas, sharing chocolate chip cookies and hot chocolate while watching Christmas movies on the hotel television. Emma curled up against me on the bed, her small body relaxed in a way it hadn't been all evening at her grandparents' house. "Mummy," she said during a commercial break, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." Are Grandma Patricia and Grandpa Richard mean people? The question was so direct, so innocent, that it took my breath away. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that people can be cruel without being evil, that then they can love you and hurt you at the same time, that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from? "They're not mean people," I said carefully, "but sometimes they say and do things that hurt people's feelings without meaning to. But they do mean to," Emma said with the clarity that children sometimes possess. "I can tell when Grandma Patricia says nice things, her face doesn't match her words." I was quiet for a moment, amazed by my daughter's perceptiveness. "You're very observant, Emma. What else have you noticed?" "They don't like you," she said matter-of-factly. "And they don't really like me either, except when other people are watching. Michael and Matthew are mean to me because accuracy of her assessment was both heartbreaking and liberating. I had spent years trying to shield Emma from the family dynamics, but she had been watching and learning all along. The question was whether I would continue to teach her to accept unacceptable treatment, or whether I would show her that she deserved better. "You're right," I said finally. "They don't treat us the way families should treat each other, and that's not okay. Is that why we left?" "Yes," I said, "because you asked me why they treat me like that, and I realised I didn't have a good answer. I realised that I've been accepting their behaviour for so long that I forgot I had a choice." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Are we going to go back?" "Not tonight," I said. "Tonight is just for us." My phone had been buzzing constantly since we left the estate. Calls and texts from David, voicemails from Patricia, even a message from Caroline expressing her concern about my erratic behaviour. I had turned off the sound and placed it face down on the nightstand, choosing to focus on Emma instead of the family crisis I had apparently created by refusing to accept their treatment. Around 10 o'clock, Emma fell asleep during the Polar Express. Her small body finally relaxed after the emotional exhaustion of the evening. I covered her with the hotel comforter and settled into the chair by the window, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the choice I had made. For 10 years I had tried to be the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect wife, the perfect mother who could somehow bridge the gap between my background and David's family's expectations. I had swallowed countless insults, ignored endless slights, and taught myself to smile through their casual cruelty because I believed that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But tonight, when Emma asked me why they treated me like that, I realised that my silence wasn't keeping the peace. It was teaching my daughter that she should accept being treated as less than, that her worth was determined by other people's approval, that love came with conditions and hierarchies. My phone lit up with another call from David. This time I answered. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" he said without preamble, his voice tight with frustration and embarrassment. "You can't just walk out of Christmas dinner. My family is completely bewildered." "Your family is bewildered because someone finally refused to accept their behaviour," I said calmly. "I'm sorry if that's inconvenient for you." "This is ridiculous," David said, his voice rising. "So, my mother made a few comments about Emma's gifts. So what? That's not worth destroying Christmas over." "A few comments," I repeated, feeling my own anger rising. "David, your mother spent the entire evening undermining me, dismissing Emma's achievements, and making it clear that we don't belong in your family. Your sister joined in, your cousins participated, and you sat there and said nothing," I defended. "You," David protested weakly. "You made one half-hearted comment about my wine knowledge," I said. "That's not defending me, David. That's the bare minimum of acknowledgement." "You're being oversensitive," he said, falling back on the familiar refrain that had ended countless arguments over the years. "My family doesn't mean anything by it. That's just how they are." "And how they are is cruel," I said. "How they are is elitist and dismissive and harmful to our daughter. Emma asked me tonight why they treat me like that, David. Our 8-year-old daughter has been watching them tear me down for years, and she's learning that this is normal." David was quiet for a moment, and I could hear voices in the background. His family discussing the situation, probably strategizing about how to manage the crisis I had created. "Come back," he said finally. "We can talk about this at home. Don't make is bigger than it needs to be. It's already big, David, I said. It's been big for 10 years. I just finally stopped pretending it wasn't. Where are you staying? He asked. The Marriott downtown, I said. Room 1527. I'm coming to get you. No, I said firmly. Emma and I are having our own Christmas. If you want to join us, you're welcome to. But I'm not coming back to that house tonight. Sarah, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I interrupted. For the first time in 10 years, I'm being completely reasonable. I'm choosing not to expose my daughter to people who make her feel small and unwanted. I'm choosing not to smile and nod while your family treats me like an unwelcome guest in my own life. I hung up before he could respond and turned my phone to silent mode. Outside the window, the city sparkled with Christmas lights, and I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in years. The next morning, Emma woke up early, her excitement about Christmas temporarily overshadowing the previous night's drama. We ordered room service breakfast, pancakes and bacon and fresh fruit that we ate while still in our pyjamas. Something that would have horrified Patricia, but delighted Emma. This is the best Christmas breakfast ever, Emma declared, syrup on, her chin and happiness in her eyes. It really is, I agreed, and meant it. There was something magical about this simple meal, this quiet morning, this space where we could just be ourselves, without judgment or criticism. Around 10 o'clock, there was a knock at our door. I looked through the peephole to see David standing in the hallway, holding a small wrapped package and looking uncertain in a way I rarely saw him. It's Daddy, I told Emma, who immediately ran to the door. Daddy, she called out as I opened the door. We're having the best Christmas adventure. David hugged Emma tightly, his face showing relief at her enthusiasm. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept well, and there was something different in his expression, a vulnerability that I hadn't seen in years. Can I come in? He asked quietly. I stepped aside to let him enter, watching as he took in the scene. The rumpled beds, the room service tray, the Christmas movie playing on the television. It was chaos compared to the rigid perfection of his family's celebrations, but it was our chaos. I brought Emma a present, he said, handing her the small package. Something I picked up yesterday, but forgot to give her last night. Emma tore open the wrapping to reveal a small jewellery box containing a delicate silver bracelet with a charm shaped like an ice skate. For my skating lessons, Emma exclaimed, her face lighting up with genuine joy. Thank you, Daddy. It was a thoughtful gift, one that acknowledged and celebrated Emma's actual interests, rather than trying to mould her into someone else's idea of what she should be. I felt a flicker of hope that maybe David was beginning to understand what had happened the night before. Emma, why don't you go brush your teeth while Daddy and I talk? I suggested. After Emma disappeared into the bathroom, David sat down heavily in the chair by the window. I didn't sleep last night, he said. I kept thinking about what you said, about Emma asking why they treat you like that. And, I prompted, as the evening finally began to wind down. Emma tugged on my sleeve and whispered something that broke my heart and changed everything. Mommy, she said, her voice so quiet that only I could hear her. Why do they treat you like that? The question hit me like a physical blow, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I realised that my 8-year-old daughter had been watching, learning, absorbing the subtle dynamics of exclusion and dismissal that I had tried so hard to shield her from. In that moment, I saw our situation through Emma's eyes, her mother being consistently realised that by staying silent, by accepting their treatment in the name of keeping the peace, I was teaching my daughter that this was normal, that this was what she should expect and accept in her own life. I looked around the table at these people who shared Emma's DNA but not her values, who claimed to love her while consistently making her feel small, who would never see her as truly equal because she carried the taint of my middle-class background. Without saying a word, I pulled out my phone and opened the hotel booking app I had installed months ago but never used. My hands were steady as I searched for available rooms at the Marriott downtown, the same hotel where David and I had spent our wedding night 10 years ago. "What are you doing?" David asked, noticing my phone activity. "Booking us a room," I said, calmly, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet dining room. "Emma and I are leaving." The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation stopped. Every face turned toward me with expressions ranging from shock to confusion to barely concealed irritation. "Sarah, don't be ridiculous," Patricia said, her voice sharp with authority. "It's Christmas. You can't just leave." "Watch me," I said, standing up and helping Emma out of her chair. "Thank you for dinner. We'll be at the Marriott if anyone wants to reach us." "Mommy," Emma asked, her voice uncertain but not unhappy. "Are we really leaving?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, taking her hand. "We're going to have our own Christmas celebration, just the two of us." As we walked toward the door, I could hear the explosion of voices behind us, David calling my name, Patricia demanding an explanation, Caroline expressing outrage at my dramatic behaviour. But for the first time in 10 years, I didn't care what they thought. I had finally answered my daughter's question, not with words, but with action. We didn't have to accept their treatment. We didn't have to smile and endure their casual cruelty. We could choose to leave, to create our own space where we were valued and respected. As we drove away from the Hartwell estate, Emma was quiet in the back seat, processing the evening's events. Finally, she spoke. "Mummy, are we in trouble?" "No, baby," I said, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "We're free. What happens next when Sarah and Emma create their own Christmas magic at the hotel? And how will David react when he realises his wife has finally reached her breaking point?" Chapter 2 reveals the beautiful aftermath of choosing self-respect over family approval. The implication was clear. As someone who had attended public schools myself, I couldn't possibly understand the importance of private education, of the networks and opportunities that came with attending the right schools. "We've looked into domestic private schools," I said, though the truth was that David and I had looked at exactly one private school before realising that the tuition alone would require significant financial sacrifices. "We're happy with Emma's current situation. Are you?" Patricia asked, her eyebrows rising in a way that suggested my happiness was irrelevant to the discussion, because Richard and I would be happy to contribute to Emma's education. We want what's best for our granddaughter. The offer was generous on its surface, but I knew it came with strings attached. If Patricia and Richard paid for Emma's education, they would expect to have a say in every aspect of it. The school, the curriculum, the extracurricular activities, even the friends Emma was allowed to make. "That's very kind," I said diplomatically, "but David and I prefer to handle Emma's education ourselves." "Pride," Patricia said with a sad shake of her head. "Such a destructive emotion. Sometimes we have to put our own feelings aside for the sake of our children." The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to be painful. Was I being prideful? Was I putting my own discomfort with their control ahead of Emma's best interests? These were the questions that kept me awake at night. The doubts that Patricia was expert at exploiting. The sound of car doors slamming announced the arrival of the rest of the family. David's sister, Caroline, and her husband, James, along with their twin boys who were Emma's age. David's uncle, Robert, and Aunt Margaret, pillars of Connecticut society who treated family gatherings like board meetings. David's cousin, William, and his wife, Stephanie, who had recently returned from their third European vacation this year. Emma came running back into the dining room, her face bright with excitement at the prospect of seeing her cousins. She adored the twins, despite the fact that they often treated her with the same casual dismissiveness that their parents showed me. "Aunt Caroline," Emma called out, as the family began filing into the house, their voices filling the grand foyer with the kind of confident chatter that came from people who had never doubted their welcome anywhere. Caroline swept into the dining room wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my car payment, her perfectly styled blonde hair not showing a single strand out of place despite the December wind outside. "Emma, darling," Caroline said, giving her niece a brief hug before immediately turning her attention to the table setting. "How lovely everything looks. Sarah, you've outdone yourself." The compliment felt backhanded, as if my efforts to contribute to the family gathering were somehow excessive or try-hard. Caroline had a way of making even praise feel like criticism, of suggesting that I was working too hard to prove myself. "Thank you," I said simply, not trusting myself to say more. The twins, Michael and Matthew, burst into the room with the kind of energy that only 8-year-old boys could muster. They were handsome children, with the same blonde hair and blue eyes that marked them as unmistakably Hartwell, and they carried themselves with the confidence that came from knowing they were the centre of their parents' universe. "Emma!" Michael called out, though his greeting lacked the warmth that Emma had shown. "Did you bring any good presents this year, or just more of those homemade things?" Emma's face fell slightly at the casual cruelty of the comment. Last year, she had spent weeks making personalised photo albums for each of her cousins, carefully selecting pictures and decorating each page with stickers and drawings. The twins had barely glanced at them before tossing them aside in favour of their expensive electronic gifts. "I made something special for you," Emma said quietly, her earlier excitement dimming in the face of her cousin's dismissiveness. "Great," Matthew said, with the kind of enthusiasm that made it clear he considered homemade gifts to be inferior. "Can't wait." I felt a surge of protective anger toward my daughter, but I bit my tongue. Correcting the twins' behaviour would only result in a lecture from Caroline about how children needed to express themselves freely, and how Emma needed to learn that not everyone would appreciate her efforts. The family gathered in the living room for cocktails before dinner, settling into their usual patterns of conversation and social positioning. The men clustered around the fireplace, discussing business and politics with the authority of people who believed their opinions shaped the world. The women arranged themselves on the antique sofas, their conversation flowing between charity, work, social events, and the kind of gentle gossip that passed for entertainment in their circles. I found myself in my usual position, physically present but socially peripheral, included in the gathering but not truly part of it. I made appropriate responses when spoken to, laughed at the right moments, and tried to contribute to conversations that often felt like they were conducted in a foreign language of shared references and inside jokes. Emma sat beside me on the sofa, her small body pressed against mine as she listened to the adult conversation with the intensity of someone trying to decode a complex puzzle. She was old enough now to sense the undercurrents, to pick up on the subtle realised that I was treated differently from the other women in the room. "Sarah, how is your little job going?" asked Stephanie, David's cousin-in-law, her tone suggesting that my work as a freelance graphic designer was more of a hobby than a legitimate career. "It's going well," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I just finished a project for a non-profit that was very rewarding." "How nice," Stephanie said, with a kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It must be fulfilling to have something to keep you busy while David is at work." The implication was clear. My work was just a way to pass time, not a real contribution to our family's financial stability or my own sense of purpose. Never mind that my freelance income had paid for Emma's dance lessons, our family vacations, and countless other expenses that David's salary alone couldn't cover. "Sarah's very talented," David said from across the room, though his defence felt automatic rather than passionate. "She designed the logo for my company's new division." "How convenient to have such skills in the family," Patricia said, her tone suggesting that my professional abilities were useful in the same way that having a good housekeeper was useful. Practical, but not particularly impressive. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I could feel Emma's eyes on me, watching my face for clues about how to interpret the subtle dynamics playing out around us. She was learning, whether I wanted her to or not, about hierarchy and belonging, about who mattered and who didn't when we finally moved to the dining room for dinner. The seating arrangement told its own story. David sat at his father's right hand, the position of the heir apparent. Caroline sat at her mother's right, the favoured daughter. I was placed between David's uncle Robert and cousin William, positioned where I could be polite to, but not central, to the conversation. Emma was seated between the twins, and I watched with growing concern as they began their usual pattern of subtle exclusion. They talked around her rather than to her, referenced shared experiences from their private school that she couldn't relate to, and generally made it clear that while she was family, she wasn't quite their kind of family. "We're going skiing in Aspen over winter break," Michael announced to the table. "Our instructor says we're ready for the Black Diamond slopes." "How exciting," Patricia said warmly. "You boys are becoming such accomplished athletes." "Emma, do you ski?" Matthew asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "No," Emma said quietly, "but I'm learning to ice skate. Mummy takes me to the rink every Saturday." "Ice skating is nice," Caroline said, with the kind of patronising tone adults used when they wanted to acknowledge a child's accomplishment without actually being impressed by it. Though of course it's not quite the same as skiing. Skiing requires much more sophistication. I felt Emma shrink beside me, her excitement about her ice skating lessons deflated by her aunt's casual dismissal. It was the same pattern I had experienced for 10 years. Every achievement minimised, every effort dismissed as somehow inadequate compared to the Hartwell standard. The dinner conversation flowed around topics that excluded Emma and me by design. Private school gossip that we couldn't relate to, country club drama that we weren't part of, investment strategies that assumed a level of wealth we didn't possess, social events that we weren't invited to attend. I tried to include Emma in the conversation when I could, asking her about school and her friends, but even these attempts were subtly undermined by the family's lack of genuine interest in her. Responses. "Emma's teacher says she's reading at a 6th grade level," I said proudly during a lull in the conversation. "How wonderful," Patricia said, with the kind of enthusiasm that felt forced. Though of course, the standards at public schools can be rather flexible. It's difficult to know what grade level really means in that context. Even Emma's academic achievements were somehow inadequate, tainted by the inferior institution where she was receiving her education. I watched my daughter's face as she processed her grandmother's words, seeing the confusion and hurt that she was too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the air as I watched my 8-year-old daughter Emma carefully arrange the place cards around my mother-in-law's dining table. She had insisted on helping with the Christmas preparations, her small hands working diligently to make everything perfect for our family gathering. What she didn't know, what I had spent years trying to shield her from, was that no amount of perfection would ever be enough for the Hartwell family. "Mommy, where should I put Grandpa Richard's card?" Emma asked, holding up the elegant cream cardstock that matched the rest of the formal table setting. "At the head of the table, sweetheart," I replied, smoothing down her red velvet dress that we had picked out together last week. "Right next to Grandma Patricia's spot." Emma nodded seriously and placed the card with the same care she gave to everything she did. At 8 years old, she was already showing signs of the perfectionism that had plagued me my entire life, the desperate need to be good enough, to earn approval, to somehow prove that we deserve to be here. The Hartwell family Christmas dinner was a tradition that stretched back 4 generations, held every year in the grand dining room of the family estate in Connecticut. The house itself was a monument to old money and older prejudices. 12,000 square feet of Georgian architecture filled with antiques, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. I had been attending these dinners for 10 years now, ever since I married David Hartwell, fresh out of college. Back then, I had been naive enough to believe that love would be enough to bridge the gap between my middle-class background and his family's blue-blooded pedigree. I thought that if I just tried hard enough, if I was polite enough, if I made myself small enough, they would eventually accept me. I was wrong. "Sarah, dear," came the voice of my mother-in-law, Patricia Hartwell, as she swept into the dining room, wearing a cashmere twin set that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "I see you've put Emma to work." How industrious. The way she said industrious made it sound like a character flaw rather than a virtue. Patricia had a gift for delivering insults wrapped in compliments, for making you feel diminished while maintaining plausible deniability about her intentions. "She wanted to help," I said, keeping my voice pleasant despite the familiar knot forming in my stomach. "She's excited about Christmas dinner with the family." "Of course she is," Patricia replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Though I do hope she understands the importance of proper behaviour during dinner. Children can be so unpredictable." Emma looked up from the table, her bright blue eyes, so much like her father's, taking in the subtle tension between her grandmother and me. She was a perceptive child, more so than I sometimes gave her credit for, and I could see her trying to decode the undercurrents of adult conversation. "I'll be good, Grandma Patricia," Emma said earnestly. "Mommy taught me all the rules about which fork to use and how to sit up straight." "I'm sure she did," Patricia said, her tone suggesting that my instruction in etiquette was somehow inadequate, though there's rather more to proper behaviour than simply knowing which utensil to use. The criticism was subtle but clear. I might be able to teach Emma the mechanics of formal dining, but I couldn't give her the breeding, the instinctive understanding of social hierarchy that came from being born into this world rather than marrying into it. David appeared in the doorway, of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "How are my girls doing?" he asked, kissing Emma on the top of her head before giving me a brief peck on the cheek. The gesture was affectionate but perfunctory, the kind of automatic display of marital unity that had become second nature after 10 years of marriage. "We're just finishing up the place cards," I said, grateful for his presence, even though I knew he wouldn't intervene if his mother decided to escalate her subtle campaign of undermining. "Wonderful," David said, though he was already checking his phone, his attention divided between his family and whatever business matter was demanding his focus. "Dad wants to know if you remembered to get the good wine from the cellar." "Of course," Patricia replied, her voice taking on the warm tone she reserved for her son. "I selected the 1985 Bordeaux that your father is so fond of, though I do worry it might be wasted on some palates." Her eyes flicked toward me as she said this, the implication clear. I was the kind of person who wouldn't appreciate fine wine, who came from the sort of background where wine came in boxes rather than vintage bottles. The truth was, I had developed quite an appreciation for wine over the years, partly out of genuine interest and partly out of self-defence. I had educated myself about vintages and regions, about proper tasting techniques and food pairings, because I knew that any gap in my knowledge would be seized upon as evidence of my inadequacy. But no amount of self-education could change the fundamental fact that I hadn't been born into this world. I would always be the outsider, the interloper, the woman who had somehow managed to snare their golden boy, but who would never truly belong. "Sarah knows quite a bit about wine, actually," David said absently, still focused on his phone. "She took that sommelier course last year." "How ambitious," Patricia said, and once again managed to make a positive trait sound like a character defect, though I've always believed that true appreciation comes from exposure rather than instruction. It's something that develops naturally when one grows up surrounded by quality. Emma had finished with the place cards and was now standing quietly beside me, her small hand slipping into mine. I could feel the tension in her body, the way she pressed closer to me when Patricia spoke. Children were like emotional barometers, picking up on atmospheric pressure changes that adults tried to ignore. "Can I help with anything else, Mummy?" Emma asked, her voice smaller than usual. "Actually, sweetheart, why don't you go wash your hands before everyone arrives?" I suggested, wanting to give her a break from the subtle hostility that seemed to permeate every interaction with my in-laws. As Emma left the room, Patricia's demeanour shifted slightly, becoming more direct now that her granddaughter was out of earshot. "Sarah, I wanted to speak with you about Emma's education," she said, her tone taking on the authority of someone accustomed to having her opinions treated as gospel. "Richard and I have been discussing it, and we think it's time to consider more appropriate schooling options. Emma loves her school," I said carefully. "She's doing very well there, and she has wonderful friends. I'm sure the public school is adequate," Patricia said, the word dripping with condescension. "But we're talking about Emma's future, the connection she makes now, the foundation she builds. These things matter in ways that perhaps you don't fully understand.